Hello and welcome to another episode of Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics with me, Oddworld Inhabitant, as your host. So today we're going to talk about something completely different. I've obviously focused heavily on pure infantry and massed infantry tactics, and I put forward my case for why I believe they are the most competitive, and if you want to go to tournament, that's what you're going to want to bring. But I understand that that's not the tactic that everyone wants to use, and I understand that you might be a bit miffed if you've got into the guard for the vehicles and suddenly someone on YouTube is telling you, well, that was all a massive waste of time. That's not true. Vehicles, the Imperial Guard, I would say, has the widest selection of vehicles available, not even including Forge World. I mean, we have walkers, we have transports, we have artillery, we have heavy tanks, we have light tanks. We've got a mixture of everything. And whilst in 7th edition these units are, or this unit type I should say, which is the vehicle, is not as good, that's not to say they are useless. They're just potentially not the most competitive thing out there. So I'm just going to talk about how we can get vehicles to work, though, because they do work. Don't get me wrong, it's not like you just put them on the battlefield, they spontaneously combust and it was a waste of time. No, but vehicles are fragile, and it's really difficult to make them not fragile. Now, I'm just going to quickly cover the disadvantages of vehicles in comparison to monstrous creatures, because monstrous creatures are what are dominating 7th edition, and they did in 6th edition as well. So, if you look at monstrous creature, you look at let's take a Riptide, for example, or almost any Tyranid monstrous creature as well. And Tyranids aren't competitive, but well, they're not too bad, but they have an armor save, number one. Vehicles actually don't have any kind of armor save. It's much easier for a monstrous creature to take advantage of cover. You put a toe in cover, and your monstrous creature now has a cover save. Vehicles have to actually be, their line of sight to them has to be obstructed to get a cover save. You could have a Riptide with its toe just tucked behind a wall and it gets a forward cover save straight away, or tucked into a ruin, but only just like 10% of the models in the ruin, it gets a forward cover save. Vehicles have to be 25% obscured or more just to get a 5+ cover save. They have to be 50% obscured or more to get a 4-up, and that's in a ruin. You know, and by the time when you start obscure, what you got to remember is when you are obscuring line of sight to your vehicle, you're also obscuring your vehicle's line of sight. And if you take Imperial Guard, for example, a lot of our Leman Russes have sponsons on them. If you're putting your vehicle behind a big wall or something similar, most of the time your sponsons and your hull mounted weapon won't be able to see. You'll just be relying on the main weapon, the turret, which bit of a disappointment if you've paid 20 points or for your heavy bolter sponsons and suddenly you can't use them. I mean that's just straight off the bat. I mean, vehicles typically only have 3 hull points. That's the equivalent of only having 3 wounds. I don't think I've ever seen a monstrous creature, not a good one, with less than 4. So, straight away we've got less wounds. We don't physically have an armor save. And it's much harder for us to get a cover save. On top of that, we're typically not as maneuverable as monstrous creatures. Most monstrous creatures can move, 6 or 12 inches. And fire all their weapons at full ballistic skill. Most vehicles can only move 6 inches, and they only get to fire 1 weapon at full ballistic skill. So you move that Chimera forward, suddenly it's only able to shoot the multi-laser, the heavy bolter, or the whole heavy flame and snap firing. I mean, it's just not as good. So we're less maneuverable. We don't get as much cover, and we've got less wounds. And we don't have an armor save. Now, vehicles have an armor value, whereas monster creatures have a toughness value. And so that armor value does tend to protect vehicles against a lot of small arms. I mean, for example, there is no vehicle in the whole of 40k that I know of that can be damaged by a lasgun. They're all armor 10 minimum. And lasgun's only strength 3, so we can't physically do it. And most vehicles are armor, like the Rhino or the Chimera, are armor 11 or 12. And that makes you immune to things like bolters, and it starts making things like heavy bolters really struggle to damage you. So vehicles are they typically didn't need armor saves because they were immune to most small arms. But then things like haywire have started to become much more common. D-weapons have become much more common. And these just completely get past vehicles. Because on a haywire, if you Skitari arc rifle haywire, you get 2 shots into a Leman Russ. Let's say you've put on your maniple, so your doctrine imperative, so you've got great ballistic skill. You hit with both shots, and then I don't know, even if it's a bare bone, let's talk about a bare bones Vanguard squad here. So you've got 2 arc rifles, so you hit with your rapid fire, you get 4 shots against the Leman Russ. Leman Russ is, let's say it's a bog standard 150 point Leman Russ versus what about an 80 point fucking Vanguard squad? So they get 4 hits. Anything on a 2 or above just puts a glance on you. On a 1, nothing happens. 2 to 5, it's a glance. 6 is a pen. So they're going to kill you. They're going to kill your 150 point vehicle with 2 guns. 2 guns which aren't even that expensive. 15 points. You see, or take fucking Wraithguard for example. Or Wraith. We won't even talk about Wraith Knights. We won't even talk about Gargantuans. We'll just talk about fucking Wraithguard. D-sides, they don't even need to roll to hit. Sure, they can't 6 you out, but they just drop next to your vehicle, or teleport next to your vehicle or whatever. Gate next to your vehicle, gate of infinity, drop down. Minimum squad of 5, 5 templates, 5 D weapons. You're fucked. Don't even need to roll to hit. D-sides, don't even need to roll to hit. So that's why vehicles struggle, because they don't have this, like they don't have a fucking armor save. They should all have 2 up armor saves. That would help. Wouldn't help against haywire, but anyway. So because of this, and because of hull points especially, now hull points I think were necessary because vehicles were too powerful in 5th edition, but I don't know if they're still necessary. But I haven't even talked about grav weapons yet, Anyway, but we all know what grav Centurion Devastators can do to an Imperial Guard tank column. We've all been there. Now, there are ways to mitigate. I won't go on about what are bad about vehicles. We all know that now. I've just covered a few things. So, how do we get that lovely, beautiful Leman Russ to work again? How do we, all these models that we've either collected over the years. I mean, I own 10 Leman Russes. I love Leman Russes. I love fucking, and now that you can get pure Leman Russ formations now, or nearest damn it, with there's one in the Cadian battle group and there's the Steel Hose formation. I love my Russes. I got into the Imperial Guard not for pure infantry all those years ago, almost 12 years ago. Maybe 13 years ago. I don't even remember. I've been fighting for the Emperor so long. All the wars merged into one now. But I remember the first tank I ever got, Leman Russ Demolisher. I still own that model, and I still love using it. It's fantastic. Leman Russ is iconic, and we're kind of fortunate because the Leman Russ it can still be used. It's still functional because it's armor 14 on the front. I know I've just said a lot of bad shit about vehicles, but the number one thing that actually kills vehicle, which isn't D, because not every army has access to D, and it isn't grav, and it isn't haywire, because not every army has access to this, it is hull points. Stripping hull points. Most people find it a lot easier to strip away a vehicle's hull points than to actually blow it up. So most people don't bother bringing in conventional weapons higher than strength 7 because they'll just glance you to death. I mean, think about this. Tau, high-yield missile pod battle suits, broadsides. You see those much more than railgun ones. Riptides. You see the heavy burst cannon much more than you see the ion accelerator. You know, scatter bikes, strength 6. Autocannons, or whatever, strength 7 or the equivalent. A lot of people rely on glancing your vehicle to death. So they think in other armies, there aren't actually that many Armor 14 vehicles out there. I mean, Land Raider, struggling to think of any Elder vehicle which is Armor 14, any Tau vehicle which is Armor 14, any Spaceman vehicle which is Armor 14, apart from the Land Raider. Imperial Guard have got something that, this is why the Leman Russ can work. Our basic battle tank is Armor 14. I had a game, and it was a friendly game. It was friendly / tournament practice, but I wasn't going to the tournament. It was a Highlander tournament. So I took, because I'm a cheesy bastard, I took 5 Leman Russes. And my opponent was Space Marines. And he had some grav bikes and some other grav, so my tank didn't last all that long. But when he was trying to shoot me with his conventional weapons, like he had last kind of Razorback, he had a Vindicator, he would go, right, so that's Armor 13 on the front. I go, no, it's Armor 14. And it's like, fuck. Demolisher Cannon, only got a 50-50 chance of actually doing any damage. Las Cannon, only got a 33% chance of doing any damage. So he tried to get on my sidearm, and he'd go, right, that must be like side armor 11. Then I was like, no, side armor 13. So you're still struggling. So Imperial Guard are fortunate because whilst vehicles are in a bad place, we do have some vehicles which can kind of just about make it. And the number one vehicle that can do it is the Russ. Okay. So we've talked about, so there's a little glimmer of hope. So we've talked about the bad things about tanks, but we're sort of transitioning into this whole good things that the Guard can bring in their vehicles and how we can get them to work. So there's a lot of vehicles out there in the Guard army. I'm not going to cover every single one of them here. We're talking about basic principles here. But I'm going to use the Leman Russ as an example, just because I don't know a single Guard player out there who doesn't get a Leman Russ. Everyone's got 1 or 2, or 2 or 3. Leman Russ is good. Now, what does the Leman Russ bring to the battlefield? Well, one, it's not cheap, but it's not expensive. The basic cheapest Leman Russ you can get is 120 points. It's the Eradicator. It's not bad. But what you need to look at the Russ is it's a cheap, spammable Armor 14 source of Armor 14, and the number one important rule about it is it's got the heavy special rule. Now, what the heavy special rule means is that it can only move 6 inches a turn, but even if it moved, unlike most of the vehicles out there, it can fire all its weapons at full ballistic skill, which is very useful. So now there's 2 kinds of Russes. There's Ordnance Russes and there's non-Ordnance Russes. Ordnance Russes are your battle cannons and demolishers. They don't really benefit from the heavy rule very much, because Ordnance means when you fire your Ordnance weapon, all of the weapons snap fire. Even if you're heavy, all the weapons snap fire. So there's no point in putting sponsons and stuff on these Russes, because they don't really benefit from the heavy rule anyway. Think about it, they could move 6 inches and fire 1 weapon at full ballistic skill anyway. So they're basically not heavy vehicles. But the other kind of Russes which are really popular are the non-ordnance ones. So they're the ones which their main weapon isn't ordnance. So Punisher, Exterminator, Vanquisher, Eradicator. I think there's one more, but Executioner. So what we're saying is how I would run my Russes is we'll go 4 Russes in an army. I would take 2 ordnance and 2 non-ordnance, because it's a good mix. because the non-ordnance ones, their main guns are powerful enough. They don't really need sponsons, whereas the ordnance ones, their main guns are powerful enough. They don't really need sponsons, whereas the non-ordnance ones, they need the sponsons to up their firepower. So that's how I would. That's just going over the rust. So we've talked about the disadvantages. We've talked about what the rust can bring. It's a cheap spam armor 14 hull. Now we're going to talk about how do we make it work. The key is moderation again. If you've got, it's very tempting just to spam 6 Leman Russes or 6 vehicles as the guard. It's very it's very tempting to spam out your vehicles. But the problem is as we've covered, is vehicles aren't that tough to kill anymore. So we have to find ways of making them more durable. And the key, as I said, is moderation. It's almost like taking a lesson from the platoon command squad. If you keep it low profile, or if you have other things in your army which your opponent has to deal with, your Russes will actually tend to last a lot longer because your opponent thinks, well, there's only 2 of them, whereas there's all this other shit to deal with. And what is the other shit I'm talking about? It's the infantry. You've got to have a really good balance of infantry to vehicles. I would recommend a minimum 60% of your army wants to be infantry, 40% wants to be vehicles. Back in the day of Old Guard, you'd have it the other way around, but now you need that 60 to 75% infantry, 40 to 25% vehicles. Okay. So how I would run an Imperial Guard army that uses vehicles, and I don't use them all that much, but I do use them. I use them regularly, but not often. What I always do is I almost take 1 platoon for every, or 1 blob, including conscripts, for every tank that I want to field. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to use the infantry as a screen to protect the vehicle. Because if you take a Leman Russ and you surround it with, let's say, 20 to 30 guardsmen or 20 to 30 conscripts in multiple layers, then what happens is you've got a 5-up cover save on all sides from incoming fire, which is great, fantastic. Straight away, that just stops 33% of the damage coming through. Some people on top of that would take camo netting, because camo netting improves your cover save by +1. The problem is if you start taking camo netting on every vehicle, it gets very expensive. So I personally wouldn't bother. I would just stick with your shield of guardsmen. So what the shield does is it provides you with a 5-up cover save. Which means your opponent is going to think to himself, I want to strip away that cover save first, because he'll probably fire 1 or 2 rounds at your tanks, and it'll be like, fuck the armor 14, fuck the infantry in the way, So it'll make him want to shoot the infantry that's getting in his way, especially if he wants to get into close combat and to tear your tanks apart in close combat. He's got to get through your 30 guys. It's called bubble wrap. Okay, it's really important that you bubble wrap your tanks with infantry. So 1 blob of infantry for every vehicle, ideally Leman Russ, and you bubble wrap 1 with the other. So because in traditional warfare, infantry would go behind the tanks and use the tanks of cover, but in the Guard, the infantry go in front of the tanks and give the tanks the cover save. It's like the wrong way around. And what this also provides, it provides you with this wall. Let's say you're stretching across your deployment zone or across a certain area. You've got this wall of infantry in front, and then behind you've got the firepower, which is punishing the opponent. Now, if you're taking vehicles, let's take again. We'll stick to the Leman Russ as an example. It means you don't have to take heavy weapons in your Guard blob, because your tank is your heavy weapons. Think of it this way. Let's say you take a 30-man blob with a commissar in there. You give them 3 grenade launchers or 3 flamethrowers, whichever you prefer. I obviously recommend grenade launchers. Some people prefer flamers. You then don't need to spend 10 points on autocannons for those squads, because behind them, let's say you've got a Leman Russ Exterminator, which has got a twin-linked autocannon. So that's like 2 autocannons, and it's twin-linked. So it's almost like 3 autocannons. And then on top of that, you've put on heavy bolter sponsons on it. So you've got 3 heavy bolters and twin-linked autocannon, 4-shot autocannon, don't forget, for 150 points. That's the same cost as 2 platoon heavy weapon teams. 60 points plus, or it's 40 points now, isn't it? Whatever. Anyway, you know what I mean. So if you're going to take Leman Russes, use them as your heavy weapons, because this will take off some of the cost. Because you know how we're saying how they're not that cheap? This will make them fairly affordable, because you're not spending twice on the heavy weapons when you really need to spend on it once. Okay? And so what you're going to do is and then you take advantage of the Russ's heavy rule, because it can only move 6 inches a turn anyway, but it still gets to fire everything. But your infantry can only move forward 6 inches a turn. So you should move forward 6 inches with your infantry, maintain the bubble wrap, and then move your tank forward as well. Because whilst your Leman Russ might have, really long range, 36 inches on the heavy bolters, 48 inches on the autocannon, exterminator autocannon, you should always move it, because if someone tries to get into close combat with you, if you've moved it in the previous turn, they only hit you on 3s, whereas if you haven't moved it, they automatically hit you. And also, it's like this rolling threat. We've talked a lot about Warhammer's psychology. If your opponent is seeing this infantry plus tank blob, so you've got 3 of these things, or 4 of these things, or 120 infantry, great. 4 Leman Russes, great. You're still going to have, that's 2 platoons and 2 conscript blobs. Hey, you've still got plenty of points left over in 1850. But you've got that, how I said you need to have that minimum 100 infantry. And so what you've got is this rolling wave coming towards him. And he's stuck in this catch-22, because he knows the infantry are OBSEC, so he knows he has to deal with those. And he knows if he wants to seriously get through to your tank, he's going to have to kill the infantry anyway. But then the tank's coming at him, and it's doing damage as well. So does he shoot your tank or shoot the infantry? Maybe he'll have if he's Tau, he'll probably have firepower to do both, and you're fucked. But Tau be Tau. But it does give you that. It gives you that advantage, because Imperial Guard do play semi like a real army does, as much as one can in 40k. Not like Eld, which is zipping all over the place. They're not like Tau, which are just zipping all over the place and shooting the shit out of you. They're not drop podding in like Space Marines. They're not trying to get into, you're not trying to get into close combat, blah, 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 blah. You're actually playing like a World War II style army. And it's all about putting pressure on your opponent. And another reason why you want to keep moving your Russes forward generally, if you can, because sometimes the opponent will be right up in your grill, you won't be able to, but we're saying if you can, you always want to try and press the advance. Because let's say you're facing a Tau player. Okay. And let's say he's stuck one of his Riptides on an objective. And you roll forward with your, does it say it's this 30-man blob and tank versus the Riptide? You're rolling forward, and maybe you're not doing any damage to it, but if you're going up to if you're contesting that objective, he's got to kill your infantry. He's got to get rid of every last infantry model to secure that objective with his Riptide. So he's going to be focusing on your infantry, which means your tank's going to be able to keep going at him. And maybe you'll kill the Riptide, but let's assume you don't. Let's assume it's turn 5, and the Riptide's just killed all your infantry, and it's all you've got left is your tank versus the Riptide, and you want to get to the objective. If you've stayed back the whole time, you're not going to be able to get to the objective. If you've been moving forward with the infantry the whole time, you can just trundle that Leman Russ onto the objective, and you're now contesting it. That can be the difference. Often it's not necessarily about controlling the objectives yourself. Sometimes it's about just stopping your opponent from controlling them. So that's So that's it basically. So just to quick recap, how do we get, we know the disadvantage of vehicles, we're not going to go over that, but how do we get them to work? Well, they've got to work in conjunction with infantry. But I don't want people to not use the Leman Russes, because Leman Russes are great cinematically, and they can be good, but they can't be good on their own. You can't just take a whole army of Leman Russes and just put 20 veterans behind, and take two formations, a steel host and a armored fist, and only have vehicles, because the enemy will just kill you. For vehicles to function, they need to have infantry support. And you need to use your infantry to shield your vehicles, and you need to use your vehicles as mobiles, heavy weapons teams. Okay. Because despite the fact that vehicles aren't that good anymore, or that Leman Russes aren't that good anymore, every Leman Russ variant out there puts out a decent level of firepower. You've got exterminators, which are going to shred infantry and light vehicles. And I used 3 demolishers the other day. Just on a whim, I was like, fuck it, 3 demolishers, but I didn't, because I spent too much on my tanks. I took 6 Leman Russes. I only had 80 infantry. This was at 1500 points. And my opponent killed my infantry and then got some Space Marine bikes into my tanks. And they just died. So that's why you need infantry. Because your infantry will stop your tanks from dying. And by stopping your tanks from dying, your tanks will serve you well. Okay? So like I said, just to recap, how do you get Imperial Guard vehicles to work? And we're talking about the Leman Russes, we're talking about the Chimeras, we're talking about the vehicles that are only really good at moving 6 inches a turn. I'm actually going to do a separate video on Hellhounds. How do we get them to work? Infantry support, bubble wrap, and this combined arms technique will mean that your tanks are helping you put down firepower, and your infantry are helping to keep your tanks alive. Okay? So thank you for listening. I know it's a bit of a long-winded video, a bit twisty-turny. We took many avenues, but I hope it's all made sense. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.